welcome back to another Just Chatting Russian Author reading series. Today we take a look at the first part of the third part or book for War and Peace, Chapter 3, Part 3 for Crime and Punishment. Alright, let's continue in Crime and Punishment. As we learned last time, Razmahin is getting along cordially with both Pulcheria Alexandrovna and Dunya, aka Androvna, right? To see her, Avdotya Romanovna. Yeah, Avdotya Romanovna and Pulcheria Romanovna. Razmahin's getting along with both of them. He's talking a lot with Raskolnikov's sister and mother about Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov's mother's worried because she's afraid that she's not going to be able to connect and see eye to eye with her son. Razmahin's kind of comforting her, telling her more about Raskolnikov in some of the episodes that he has, the way that he is. It's been a few years since they've seen Raskolnikov, so they want like the lowdown. We know that Razmahin has feelings for Raskolnikov's sister, Dunya or Avdotya. Avdotya, yeah, her stinking name, hard to remember. Okay, but let's move on. Chapter 3. He is quite well. Oh, and Peter Petrovich wrote Pulcheria, Raskolnikov's mom, a letter saying that if Raskolnikov is going to be there in the meeting, that he doesn't want to meet. Raskolnikov left such a negative impression when they first met at Raskolnikov's place that Peter Petrovich doesn't want to see Raskolnikov at all. Raskolnikov, for the record, has been opposed to his sister marrying Peter Petrovich from the get-go. He is well, quite well, Zossimov cried cheerfully as they entered. He had come in 10 minutes earlier and was sitting in the same place as before, on the sofa. Raskolnikov was sitting in the opposite corner, fully dressed and carefully washed and combed, as he had not been for some time past. The room was immediately crowded, yet Nastasia managed to follow the visitors in and stay to listen. Raskolnikov really was almost well, as compared with his condition the day before, but he was still pale, listless, and somber. He's been having, episodes of, sickness, and it's hard to tell if he's actually sick or if he's just depressed. He stays in bed all day. He doesn't like to see or talk to people. Yeah, and from what I can tell, it's gotten worse since he participated in the murders. Raskolnikov really was almost well. He was still pale, listless, and somber. He looked like a wounded man or one who has undergone some terrible physical suffering. His brows were knitted, his lips compressed, his eyes feverish. He spoke little and reluctantly, as though performing a duty, and there was a restlessness in his movements. He's just not that social. Even with his family, he's not, so... yeah. He only wanted a sling on his arm or a bandage on his finger to complete the impression of a man with a painful abscess or broken arm. pale, somber face lighted up for a moment when his mother and sister entered, but this only gave it a look of more intense suffering, in place of its listless dejection. The light soon died away, but the look of suffering remained, and Zosimov, watching and studying his patient with all the zest of a young doctor beginning to practice, noticed in him no joy at the arrival of his mother and sister, but a sort of bitter, hidden determination to bear another hour or two of inevitable torture. He saw later that almost every word of the following conversation seemed to touch on some sore place and irritate it. He's like, I don't want to talk about this. But at the same time, he marveled at the power of controlling himself and hiding his feelings in a patient who the previous day had, like a monomaniac, fallen into a frenzy at the slightest word. Yes, I see myself now that I am almost well, said Raskolnikov, giving his mother and sister a kiss of welcome which made Pulcheria Alexandrovna radiant at once. And I don't say this as I did yesterday, he said, addressing Razumihin with a friendly pressure of his hand. Yes, indeed, I'm quite surprised at him today, began Zosimov, much delighted at the lady's entrance, for he had not succeeded in keeping up a conversation with his patient for 10 minutes. In another 3 or 4 days, if he goes on like this, he will be just as before, that is, as he was a month ago, or 2, or perhaps even 3. This has been coming on for a while, huh? I confess now, that it has been perhaps your own fault, he added with a tentative smile, as though still afraid of irritating him. It is very possible, answered Raskolnikov coldly. I should say, too, continued Zosimov with zest, that your complete recovery depends solely on yourself. Now that one can talk to you, I should like to impress upon you that it is essential to avoid the elementary, so to speak, fundamental causes tending to produce your morbid condition. In that case, you will be cured. If not, it will go from bad to worse. These fundamental causes I don't know, but they must be known to you. You are an intelligent man. You must have observed yourself, of course. I think the smarter someone is, the more likely it is that they'll suffer from depression, because they'll see all the messed up world that's around them. Some artists are this way too, where it's like, they just have a lot of time to think. And that in turn has an effect. They say, I think genius is isolating, I think is the expression. It's lonely at the top. Yeah, another way of saying it is it's lonely at the top. In that case, you'll be cured. The fundamental causes I don't know, but they must be known to you. You are an intelligent man and must have observed yourself, of course. I fancy the first stage of your derangement coincides with your leaving the university. You must not be left without occupation. And so work and a definite aim set before you might, I fancy, be very beneficial. Yeah, I guess if you can find a good job for himself. Yes, you're perfectly right. I'll make haste and return to the university, and then everything will go smoothly. Like a preoccupation, something to keep his mind busy. Zosimov, who had begun his sage advice partly to make an effect before the ladies, was certainly somewhat mystified. When glancing at his patient, he observed unmistakable mockery on his face. This lasted an instant, however. Pulcheria Alexandrovna began at once thanking Zosimov, especially for his visit to their lodging the previous night. Yeah, he's been a great doctor for them. What? He saw you last night? Raskolnikov asked as though startled. Then you have not slept either after your journey. Ach, Rodya, that was only till 2 o'clock. Dunya and I never go to bed before 2 at home. I don't know how to thank him either, Raskolnikov went on, suddenly frowning and looking down. Setting aside the question of payment, forgive me for referring to it, he turned to Zosimov. I really don't know what I have done to deserve such special attention from you. I simply don't understand it, and it weighs upon me, indeed, because I don't understand it. I tell you so candidly. Don't be irritated. Zosimov forced himself to laugh. Assume that you are my first patient. Well, we fellows just begin to practice love our first patients as if they were our children. Some almost fall in love with them. And of course I am not rich in patience. That's patience with an NTS, by the way, not the patience as a CE version. I say nothing about him. So he has a small practice, Dr. Zosimov. I say nothing about him, added Raskolnikov. pointing to Razmahin. Though he has had nothing from me either but insult and trouble. Yeah, pretty much. Razmahin's done nice things for him, and he's kind of been quarrelsome. But part of that may have to do with him not feeling well. Yeah, that's always a rational explanation. What nonsense he is talking. Why, you're in a sentimental mood today, are you? Shouted Razmahin. If he had more penetration, he would have seen that there was no trace of sentimentality in him, but something indeed quite the opposite. Nonchalance, I guess. I guess it would be nonchalance. But if Dotya Romanovna noticed it, she was intently and uneasily watching her brother. As for you, mother, I don't dare to speak, he went on, as though repeating a lesson learned by heart. It is only today that I have been able to realize a little how distressed you must have been here yesterday, waiting for me to come back. When he had said this, he suddenly held out his hand to his sister, smiling without a word. But in this smile there was a flash of real, unfeigned feeling. Dunya caught it at once and warmly pressed his hand, overjoyed and thankful. It was the first time he had addressed her since their dispute the previous day. The mother's face lighted up with ecstatic happiness at the sight of this conclusive, unspoken reconciliation. Yes, that is what I love him for. Razmahin, exaggerating it all, muttered to himself, with a vigorous turn in his chair. He has these movements. Oh, okay. And how well he does it all, the mother was thinking to herself. What generous impulses he has, and how simply, how delicately he put an end to all the misunderstanding with his sister, simply by holding out his hand at the right minute and looking at her like that. What fine eyes he has, and how fine his whole face is. He's even better looking than Dunya. But good heavens, what a suit. How terribly he's dressed. I think those are the exact same clothes that Razmahin bought for him, because he got a new wardrobe, like, I think halfway through part 2. Courtesy of Razmahin. So, what is that commentary? I don't know. Vasya, the messenger boy in Afanasy Ivanich's shop, is better dressed. I could rush at him and hug him, weep over him, but I'm afraid. Oh dear, he's so strange. He's talking kindly, but I'm afraid. What? Why? What am I afraid of? Oh, Rodya, you wouldn't believe, she began suddenly in haste to answer his words to her, how unhappy Dunya and I were yesterday. Now that it's all over and done with me, we are quite happy again, I can tell you. Fancy, we ran here almost straight from the train to embrace you, and that woman, here she is. Good morning, Nastasia. She told us at once that you were lying in a high fever and had just run away from the doctor in delirium. They were looking for you in the streets. You can't imagine how we felt. You couldn't help thinking of the tragic end of Lieutenant Potanchikov, a friend of your father's. You can't remember him, Rodya, who ran out in the same way in a high fever and fell into the well in the courtyard, and they couldn't pull him out till next day. Of course we exaggerated things. Now we got it like that. Trick reference. We were on the point of rushing to find Peter Petrovich to ask him to help. Because we are alone. Utterly alone, she said plaintively and stopped short, suddenly. Recollecting it was still somewhat dangerous to speak of Peter Petrovich, although we are quite happy again. What? Help for what? Yeah, I don't know. Yes, of course, it's very annoying, Raskolnikov muttered in reply. Yeah, Raskolnikov just does not like Peter Petrovich at all. He's like, how dare you speak that scoundrel's name in my presence? Yes, it's very annoying, Raskolnikov muttered in reply, but with such a preoccupied and inattentive air that Dunya gazed at him in perplexity. What else was it I wanted to say? He went on, trying to recollect. Oh yes, mother, and you too, Dunya, please don't think that I didn't mean to come and see you today. I was waiting for you to come first. What are you saying, Rodya? Cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna. She too was surprised. Is he answering us as a duty? Dunya wondered. Is he being reconciled and asking forgiveness as though he were performing a rite or repeating a lesson? I've only just waked up and wanted to go to you, but was delayed owing to my clothes. I forgot yesterday to ask her, Nastasia, to wash out the blood. I've only just dressed. Blood? What blood? Pulcheria Alexandrovna asked in alarm. Oh, nothing. Don't be uneasy. It was when I was wandering about yesterday, rather delirious. I chanced upon a man who had been run over, a clerk. Delirious, but you remember everything, Razumhin interrupted. That's true, Raskolnikov answered with special carefulness. Remember everything, even to the slightest detail. And yet, why I did that and went there and said that I can't clearly explain now. Yeah, something that gruesome is probably not something you're going to forget. Even in the state that he was in. Familiar phenomenon, interposes Zosimov. Actions are sometimes performed in a masterly and most cunning way, while the direction of the actions is deranged and dependent on various morbid impressions. It's like a dream. Perhaps it's a good thing, really, that he should think me almost a madman, thought Raskolnikov. Why, people in perfect health act in the same way too, observed Dunya, looking uneasily at Zosimov. There is some truth in your observation, the latter replied. In that sense, we're all certainly all not infrequently like madmen, but with the slight difference that the deranged are somewhat matter, for we must draw a line. A normal man, it is true, hardly exists. Among dozens, perhaps hundreds of thousands, hardly one is to be met with. Okay. At the word madman, carelessly dropped by Zosimov in his chatter on his favorite subject, everyone frowned. Raskolnikov sat, seeming not to pay attention, plunged in thought with a strange smile on his pale lips. He was still meditating on something. Well, what about the man who was run over? I interrupted you, Razumhin cried hastily. What? Raskolnikov seemed to wake up. Oh. I got spattered with blood helping to carry him to his lodging. By the way, Mama, I did an unpardonable thing yesterday. I was literally out of my mind. I gave away all the money you sent me to his wife for the funeral. She's a widow now in consumption. Poor creature. 3 little children starving, nothing in the house. There's a daughter, too. Perhaps you'd have given it yourself if you'd seen them. But I had no right to do it, I admit, especially as I knew how you needed the money yourself. Yes, a terrible thing. Terrible thing to waste. Terrible thing to chase after. Tell others one must have the right to do it. Or else creves chen si vous its past contents. He laughed. That's right, isn't it, Dunya? No, it's not. Answered Dunya firmly. Yeah, I have no idea what the French means. Bah, you too have ideals, he muttered, looking at her almost with hatred. Let me see if I can Google it. Drop dead dogs if you aren't satisfied. It also is referenced in Les Miserables. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Les Miserables, which Dostoevsky read on its appearance in 1862. Pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. You too have ideals, he muttered, looking at her almost with hatred and smiling sarcastically. I ought to have considered that. Well, that's praiseworthy and it's better for you. And if you reach a line you won't overstep, you'll be unhappy. And if you overstep it, you'll be still unhappier. But all that's nonsense, he added irritably, vexed at being carried away. I only meant to say that I beg your forgiveness, Mother, he concluded shortly and abruptly. That's enough, Rodya. I'm sure that everything you do is very good, said his mother, delighted. Don't be too sure, he answered, twisting his mouth into a smile. Silence followed. There was a certain constraint in all this conversation, and in the silence, and in the reconciliation, and in the forgiveness, and all were feeling it. All were feeling it. It's as though they were afraid of me, Raskolnikov was thinking to himself, looking askance at his mother and sister. Pulcheria Alexandrovna was indeed growing more timid the longer she kept silent. Yet in their absence I seemed to love them so much, flashed through his mind. Do you know, Rodya, Marfa Petrovna is dead? Pulcheria Alexandrovna suddenly blurted out. What Marfa Petrovna? Oh, mercy on us. Marfa Petrovna Svidrigailov. 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 I might still be saying it wrong. Marfa Petrovna Svidrigailov. I wrote you so much about her. Ah, yes, I remember. So she's dead. Oh, really? He roused himself suddenly as if waking up. What did she die of? Only imagine, quite suddenly, Pulcheria Alexandrovna answered hurriedly, encouraged by his curiosity. On the very day I was sending you that letter. Would you believe it? That awful man seems to have been the cause of her death. They say he beat her dreadfully. Why were they on such bad terms? He asked, addressing his sister. Why were they on such bad terms? Addressing his sister. Not at all. Quite the contrary, indeed. With her, he was always very patient. Considerate, even. In fact, all those 7 years of their married life he gave way to her, too much so indeed in many cases. All of a sudden he seems to have lost patience. Then he could not have been so awful if he controlled himself for 7 years. You seem to be defending him, Dunya. No, he's an awful man. I can imagine nothing more awful, Dunya answered almost with a shudder, knitting her brows and sinking into thought. That happened in the morning, Pulcheria Alexandrovna went on hurriedly, and directly afterwards she ordered the horses to be harnessed to drive to the town immediately after dinner. She always used to drive to the town in such cases. She ate a very good dinner, I'm told. After the beating, that was always her habit, and immediately after dinner, so as not to be late in starting, she went to the bathhouse. You see, she was undergoing some treatment with baths. They have a cold spring there and she used to bathe in it regularly every day. No sooner had she got into the water when she suddenly had a stroke. I should think so, said Zossimov. And did he beat her badly? What does that matter? Put in Dunya. But I don't know why you want to tell such gossip, Mother, said Raskolnikov irritably, as it were in spite of himself. Oh, my dear, I don't know what to talk about, broke from Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Why, are you all afraid of me? He asked, with a constrained smile. That's certainly true, said Dunya, looking directly and sternly at her brother. Mother was crossing herself with terror as she came up the stairs. His face worked as though in convulsion. What are you saying, Dunya? Don't be angry, please, Rodya. Why did you say that, Dunya? Pulcheria Alexandrovna began, overwhelmed. You see, coming here, I was dreaming all the way in the train, how we should meet, how we should talk over everything together. How I was so happy. I did not notice the journey. But what am I saying? I'm happy now. You should not, Dunya. I'm happy now, simply in seeing you, Rodya. Hush, Mother, he muttered in confusion, not looking at her but pressing her hand. We shall have time to speak freely of everything. As he said this, he was suddenly overwhelmed with confusion and turned pale. Again that awful sensation he had known of late passed with deadly chill over his soul. Again it became suddenly plain and perceptible to him that he had just told a fearful lie, that he would never now be able to speak freely of everything, that he would never again be able to speak of anything to anyone. The anguish of this thought was such that for a moment he almost forgot himself. He got up from his seat and, not looking at anyone, walked towards the door. What are you about? Cried Razumhin, clutching him by the arm. He sat down again and began looking about him in silence. They were all looking at him in perplexity. But what are you all so dull for? He shouted, suddenly and quite unexpectedly. Do say something. What's the use of sitting like this? Come, do speak. Let us talk. We meet together and sit in silence. Come, anything. Like, yeah, they haven't seen each other in a few years, so... Any silence might seem strange. Thank God, I was afraid the same thing as yesterday was beginning again, said Pulcheria Alexandrovna, crossing herself. What's the matter, Rodya? Asked Avdotya Romanovna distrustfully. Oh, nothing, I remembered something, he answered and suddenly laughed. Well, if you remembered something, that's all right. I was beginning to think, muttered Zossimov, getting up from the sofa. It's time for me to be off. He's like, okay, it's time for me to go. I'll look in again, perhaps, if I can. He made his bows and went out. What an excellent man, observed Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Yes, excellent, splendid, well-educated, intelligent, Raskolnikov began, suddenly speaking with surprising rapidity, and a liveliness he had not shown till then. I can't remember where I met him before my illness. I believe I've met him somewhere. And this is a good man, too, he nodded at Razumhin. Do you like him, Dunya? He asked, and suddenly for some unknown reason laughed. Very much, answered Dunya. Phew, What a pig you are, Rasmussen protested, blushing in terrible confusion. He got up from his chair. Rasmussen is the jealous type. Sure. Pulcheria Alexandrovna smiled faintly, but Raskolnikov laughed out aloud. Where are you off to? I must go. You need not at all. Stay. Zosimov is gone, so you must. Don't go. What's the time? Is it 12 o'clock? What a pretty watch you've got, Dunya. But why are you all silent again? I do all the talking. It was a present from Marfa Petrovna, answered Dunya. And a very expensive one, added Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Ah, what a big one. Hardly like a lady's. I like that sort, said Dunya. So it's not a present from her fiancé, thought Rasmussen, and was unreasonably delighted. He's like, ah, good. That's one less thing that Dinkelbergian Peter Petrovich has on me. Dinkelberg. I thought it was Luzhin's present, observed Raskolnikov. So apparently Raskolnikov thought that too. No, he has not made Dunya any presents yet. Ah, and do you remember, Mother? I was in love and wanted to get married, he said, suddenly looking at his mother, who was disconcerted by the sudden change of subject and the way he spoke of it. Oh yes, my dear. Pulcheria Alexandrovna exchanged glances with Dunya and Rasmussen. Yes, what shall I tell you? I don't remember much indeed. She was such a sickly girl, he went on, growing dreamy and looking down again. Quite an invalid. She was fond of giving alms to the poor, and was always dreaming of a nunnery. And she burst into tears when she began talking to me about it. Yes, I remember. I remember very well. She was an ugly little thing. I really don't know what drew me to her then. I think it was because she was always ill. If she had been lame or hunchback, I believe I should have liked her better still. He smiled dreamily. Yes, it was sort of a spring delirium. No, it was not only spring delirium, said Dunya with warm feeling. He fixed a strained, intent look on his sister, but did not hear or did not understand her words. Then, completely lost in thought, he got up, went up to his mother, kissed her, went back to his place, and sat down. You love her even now, said Pulcheria Alexandrovna, touched. Her now? Oh, yes. You ask about her? No. That's all now, as it were, in another world. So long ago. Indeed, everything happened here seems somehow far away. If she was that sickly, she might be dead by that point. He looked attentively at them. You now, I seem to be looking at you from 1,000 miles away, but goodness knows why we are talking of that. What's the use of asking about it? He added with annoyance, biting his nails, fell into dreamy silence again. What a wretched lodging you have, Rodya. It's like a tomb, said Pulcheria Alexandrovna, suddenly breaking the oppressive silence. Sure, it's quite half through your lodging that you become so melancholy. My lodging, he answered listlessly. Yes, the lodging had a great deal to do with it. I thought that too, if only you knew, though. What a strange thing you just said now, Mother, he said, laughing strangely. Little more, and their companionship, this mother and sister, with him after 3 years' absence, this intimate tone of conversation, in face of the utter impossibility of really speaking about anything, would have been beyond his power of endurance. But there was one urgent matter, which must be settled one way or the other that day. So he had decided when he woke. Now he was glad to remember it as a means of escape. Listen, Dunya, he began gravely and dryly. Of course I beg your pardon for yesterday, but I consider it my duty to tell you again that I do not withdraw from my chief point. It is me or Luzhin. If I am a scoundrel, you must not be. So yeah, Luzhin does not like Rodya, and Rodya does not like Luzhin. I cease at once to look on you as a sister, if you marry this guy. Wow. Rodya, it is the same as yesterday again, Pulcheria Alexandrovna cried mournfully. Why do you call yourself a scoundrel? I can't bear it. You said the same yesterday. Brother, Dunya answered firmly and with the same dryness. In all this there is a mistake on your part. I thought it over at night and found out the mistake. It's all because you seem to fancy I'm sacrificing myself to someone and for someone. That is not the case at all. I'm simply marrying for my own sake, because things are hard for me. Though of course I shall be glad if I succeed in being useful to my family. But that is not the chief motive for my decision. think Dunya and Sonia have similar reasons for doing things that they do. Like hardship. Hardship is the reason why Sonia's on the street. Hardship is the reason why Dunya's marrying the rich jerk. She's lying, he thought to himself, biting his nails vindictively. Yeah, family. Family's not her reason for doing it. She's doing it for herself. She says, proud creature, she won't admit she wants to do it out of charity. Too haughty. Oh, base characters. They even love as though they hate. Oh, how I hate them all. In fact, continued Dunya, I'm marrying Peter Petrovich because of two evils I choose the less. Two evils I choose the less. I intend to do honestly all he expects of me, so I am not deceiving him. Why did you smile just now? She too flushed, and there was a gleam of anger in her eyes. All? He asked with a malignant grin. Within certain limits. Both the manner and form of Peter Petrovich's courtship showed me at once what he wanted. He may of course think too well of himself, but I hope he esteems me too. Why are you laughing again? And why are you blushing again? You're lying, sister. You're intentionally lying, simply from feminine obstinacy, simply to hold your own guard against me. You cannot respect Luzhin. I have seen him and talked with him. So you're selling yourself for money, and so in any case you're acting basely. I'm glad at least that you can blush for it. It's not true, I'm not lying, cried Dunya, losing her composure. I would not marry him if I were not convinced that he esteems me and thinks highly of me. I would not marry him if I were not firmly convinced that I can respect him. Fortunately, I can have convincing proof of it this very day. Such a marriage is not a vileness, as you say. Even if you were right, if I really had determined on a vile action, is it not merciless on your part to speak to me like that? I mean, I think it's his responsibility, if that were the case. Why do you demand of me a heroism that perhaps you have not either? It is despotism. It is tyranny. If I ruin anyone, it's only myself. I'm not committing a murder. Like, in a perfect world, if she were making a mistake, she would know and recognize that. But in, barring that, her brother can certainly help her see that she's making a mistake. If it is indeed the case. I'm not committing a murder. Why do you look at me like that? Why are you so pale, Rodya, darling? What's the matter? Good heavens, you made him faint, cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna. There he goes again, fainting. One of his fainting episodes. I think this is the second time he's fainted. The previous time was in the police station, after they were asking about his debt. No, nonsense. It's nothing. A little giddiness, not fainting. You have fainting on the brain. Yes, what was I saying? Oh, yes. What way will you get convincing proof today that you can respect him and that he esteems you as you said? I think you said today. Mother, show Rodya Pyotr Petrovich's letter, said Dunya. With trembling hands, Pulcheria Alexandrovna gave him the letter. He took it with great interest, but before opening it, he suddenly looked with a sort of wonder at Dunya. It is strange, he said slowly, as though struck by a new idea. What am I making such a fuss for? What is it all about? Marry whom you like. He said this as though to himself, but said it aloud and looked for some time at his sister, as though puzzled. He opened the letter at last, still with the same look of strange wonder on his face. Then, slowly and attentively, he began reading, and read it through twice. Pulcheria Alexandrovna showed marked anxiety, and all indeed expected something particular. What surprises me, he began after a short pause, handing the letter to his mother, but not addressing anyone in particular, is that he's a businessman, a lawyer, and his conversation is pretentious indeed. Yet he writes such an uneducated letter. They all started. They had expected something quite different. But they all write like that, Razumhin observed abruptly. Have you read it? Yes. We showed him, Rodya. We consulted him just now. Pulcheria Alexandrovna began, embarrassed. That's just the jargon of the courts, Razumhin put in. Legal documents are written like that to this day. Legal? Yes, it's just legal business language. Not so very uneducated and not quite educated. Business language. Peter Petrovich makes no secret of the fact that he had a cheap education. He is proud indeed of having made his own way, Avdotya Romanovna observed, somewhat offended by her brother's tone. Well, if he's proud of it, he has reason. I don't deny it. You seem to be offended, sister, at my making only such a frivolous criticism on the letter, and to think that I speak of such trifling matters on purpose to annoy you. It's quite the contrary. An observation apropos of the style occurred to me that it is by no means irrelevant as things stand. There is one expression, blame yourselves, put it in very significantly and plainly, and there is besides a threat that he will go away at once if I am present. That threat to go away is equivalent to a threat to abandon you both if you are disobedient, and to abandon you now after summoning you to Petersburg. Well, what do you think? Can one resent such an expression from Luzhin as we should if he pointed to Rasmussen, had written it? Or Zosimov, or one of us? No, answered Dunya with more animation. I saw clearly that it was too naively expressed, and that perhaps he simply has no skill in writing. That is a true criticism, brother. I did not expect it, indeed. It is expressed in legal style, sounds coarser than perhaps he intended, but I must disillusion you a little. There is one expression in the letter, one slander about me, and rather a contemptible one. I gave the money last night to the widow, a woman in consumption, crushed with trouble, and not on the pretext of the funeral. Yeah, I'm still not sure how Peter Petrovich even knew about that, but okay. Simply to pay for the funeral. And not to the daughter, a young woman, as he writes, of notorious behavior, whom I saw last night for the first time in my life, but to the widow. In all this, I see too hasty a desire to slander me, and to raise dissension between us. Like, how did he even know about that? Because I don't think he was there. Like, it may have been a spectacle, but I don't think he was there. And yeah, he doesn't even have the facts right. It's expressed again in legal jargon, that is to say with a too obvious display of aim, with a very naive eagerness. He's a man of intelligence, but to act sensibly, intelligence is not enough. It all shows the man, and I don't think he has great esteem for you. I tell you this simply to warn you, because I sincerely wish for your good. Yeah, I would say Raskolnikov was pretty bold and brash. Seeing Peter Petrovich for the first time. He's like, I really think you should go. Dunya did not reply. Her resolution had been taken. She was only waiting that evening. She was only awaiting the evening. Then what is your decision, Rodya? Asked Pulcheria Alexandrovna, who was more uneasy than ever at the sudden new business-like tone of his talk. What decision? You see, Peter Petrovich writes that you are not to be with us this evening, and that he will go away if you come. So will you come? That, of course, is not for me to decide, but for you first, if you're not offended by such a request. Secondly, by Dunya, if she too is not offended. I will do what you think is best, he added dryly. Dunya has already decided, and I fully agree with her, Pulcheria Alexandrovna hastened to declare. I decided to ask you, Rodya, to urge you not to fail to be with us at this interview, said Dunya. Will you come? Yes. I will ask you, too, to be with us at 8 o'clock, she said, addressing Rasmussen. Mother, I'm inviting him, too. Quite right, Dunya. Well, since you have decided, added Pulcheria Alexandrovna, so be it. I shall feel easier myself. I do not like concealment and deception. Better let us have the whole truth. Peter Petrovich may be angry or not now. Still not sure when Raskolnikov is going to get arrested. Still not sure. But I'm pretty sure that Peter Petrovich is going to call it all off when he sees Raskolnikov again. We'll have to see next time in Chapter 4. We're almost halfway through the book, Crime and Punishment. We're only 15% of the way through. One Piece, Book 3, 1805, Chapter 1. Prince Vasily was not a man who deliberately thought out his plans. Still less did he think of injuring anyone for his own advantage. He was merely a man of the world who had got on, and to whom getting on had become a habit. He's like, just going through the motions again. Schemes and devices for which he never rightly accounted to himself, but which formed the whole interest of his life, were constantly shaping themselves in his mind, rising from the circumstances and persons he met. Of these plans he had not merely one or two in his head, but dozens, some only beginning to form themselves, some approaching achievement, some in course of disintegration. He did not, for instance, say to himself, "This man now has influence. I must gain his confidence and friendship, and through him obtain a special grant." Nor did he say to himself, "Pierre is a rich man. I must entice him to marry my daughter, and lend me the 40,000 rubles I need." But when he came across a man of position, his instinct immediately told him that this man could be useful, and without any premeditation, Prince Vasily took the first opportunity to gain his confidence, flatter him, become intimate with him, and finally make his request. Okay. He had Pierre at hand in Moscow and procured for him an appointment as gentleman of the bedchamber, which at that time conferred the status of Councillor of State, and insisted on the young man accompanying him to Petersburg and staying at his house. With apparent absent-mindedness, but with unhesitating assurance that he was doing the right thing, Prince Vasily did everything to get Pierre to marry his daughter. Money, money, money. Had he thought out his plans beforehand, he could not have been so natural, and shown so unaffected familiarity and intercourse with everybody both above and below him in social standing. Something always drew him toward those richer and more powerful than himself, and he had rare skill in seizing the most opportune moment of making use of people. Shiny. You can't cue that song from Moana. So shiny. Luckily, we're smarter than crabs. Some of us are, anyway. Pierre unexpectedly became Count Bezikov, and a rich man. He inherited Count Bezikov's fortune. Felt himself after his recent loneliness and freedom from cares so beset, preoccupied that only in bed was he able to be by himself. He had to sign papers, to present himself at government offices, the purpose of which was not clear to him, to question his chief steward, to visit his estate near Moscow, and to receive many people who formerly did not even wish to know of his existence, but would now have been offended and grieved had he chosen not to see them. I think there's a Mike Jones song about this, too. These different people, businessmen, relations, and acquaintances alike, were all disposed to treat the young heir in the most friendly and flattering manner. They were all evidently firmly convinced of Pierre's noble qualities. He was always hearing such words as, "With your remarkable kindness," or "with your excellent heart," "You are yourself so honorable Count," or "Were he as clever as you," and so on, till he began sincerely to believe in his own exceptional kindness and extraordinary intelligence. The more so as in depth of his heart, it always seemed to him that he was really kind and intelligent. Even people who had formerly been spiteful toward him and evidently unfriendly now became gentle and affectionate. The angry eldest princess with the long waist and hair plastered down like a doll's had come into Pierre's room after the funeral. With drooping eyes and frequent blushes, she told him she was very sorry about their past misunderstandings, and did not now feel she had a right to ask him for anything, except only for permission, after the blow she had received, to remain for a few weeks longer in the house she so loved, and where she had sacrificed so much. She could not refrain from weeping at these words. Touched that the statuesque princess could so change, Pierre took her hand and begged her forgiveness, without knowing what for. From that day, the eldest princess quite changed toward Pierre and began knitting a striped scarf for him. No new friends, no. Do this for my sake, mon cher. After all, she had to put up with a great deal from the deceased, said Prince Vasily to him, handing him a deed to sign for the princess's benefit. Prince Vasily came to the conclusion that it was necessary to throw this bone, a bill for 30,000 rubles to the poor princess that it might not occur to her to speak of his share in the affair of the inlaid portfolio. Pierre signed the deed, and after that the princess grew still kinder. The younger sisters also became affectionate to him, especially the youngest, the pretty one with the mole, who often made him feel confused by her smiles and her own confusion when meeting him. It seemed so natural to Pierre that everyone should like him, and it would have seemed so unnatural had anyone disliked him, that he could not but believe in the sincerity of those around him. Besides, he had no time to ask himself whether these people were sincere or not. He was always busy and always felt in a state of mild and cheerful intoxication. He felt as though he were the center of some important general movement, that something was constantly expected of him, that if he did not do it, he would grieve and disappoint many people, but if he did this and that, all would be well, and he did what was demanded of him. But still, that happy result always remained in the future. Again, Leo likes to focus on the rich and powerful. Russian royalty, people inheriting money. Doesn't focus as much on the frontline infantry. That doesn't say he doesn't, he just focuses on them a lot less. More than anyone else, the players. More than anyone else, Prince Vasily took possession of Pierre's affairs, and of Pierre himself in those early days. From the death of Count Bezúkhov, he did not let go his hold of the lad. He had the air of a man oppressed by business, weary and suffering, who yet would not, for pity's sake, leave this helpless youth, who, after all, was the son of his old friend, and the possessor of such enormous wealth, to the caprice of fate and the designs of rogues. During the few days he spent in Moscow after the death of Count Bezúkhov, he would call Pierre, or go to him himself, and tell him what ought to be done in a tone of weariness and assurance, as if he were adding every time, "You know I am overwhelmed with business, and it's purely out of charity that I trouble myself about you. You also know quite well that what I propose is the only thing possible." He's like, "So I heard you inherited all that money. So what can you do for me?" "Well, my dear fellow, tomorrow we're off at last," said Prince Vasily one day, closing his eyes and fingering Pierre's elbow, speaking as if he were saying something which had long since been agreed upon and could not now be altered. "We start tomorrow, and I'm giving you a place in my carriage. I'm very glad. All our important business here is now settled, and I ought to have been off long ago. Here is something I have received from the Chancellor. I asked him for you. You have been entered in the diplomatic corps, made a gentleman of the bedchamber. The diplomatic career now lies open before you." Notwithstanding the tone of wearied assurance with which these words were pronounced, Pierre, who had so long been considering his career, wished to make some suggestion. "Not all that glitters is gold." But Prince Vasily interrupted him in a special deep cooing tone, precluding the possibility of interrupting his speech, which he used in extreme cases when special persuasion was needed. "Mas, mon cher, I did this for my own sake, to satisfy my conscience. There's nothing to thank me for. No one has ever complained yet of being too much loved. Besides, you're free. You could throw it up tomorrow, but you'll see everything for yourself when you get to Petersburg. High time for you to get away from these terrible recollections." Prince Vasily sighed. Yes, my boy, my valet can go in your carriage. I was nearly forgetting," he added. "You know, monsieur, your father and I had some accounts to settle, so I have received what was due from the Ryazan estate, and will keep it. You won't require it. We'll get into these accounts later." By what was due from the Ryan estate, Prince Vasily meant several thousand rubles quitrent received from Pierre's peasants, which the prince had retained for himself. Quitrent is a rent typically small and paid by a freeholder or copyholder in lieu of services that might be required of them. In Petersburg, as in Moscow, Pierre found the same atmosphere of gentleness and affection. He could not refuse the post, or rather the rank, for he did nothing, that Prince Vasily had procured for him, and acquaintances, invitations, and social occupations were so numerous that, even more than in Moscow, he felt a sense of bewilderment, bustle, and continual expectation of some good, always in front of him but never attained. Sometimes like rappers will get this way too, where it's like, more money, y'all. Woo woo. Yeah, it is kind of annoying. On his former bachelor acquaintances, many were no longer in Petersburg. The guards had gone to the front. Dólokhov had been reduced to the ranks. Anatole was in the army somewhere in the provinces. Prince Andrew was abroad. So Pierre had not the opportunity to spend his nights as he used to like to spend them, or to open his mind, intimate talks with a friend older than himself and whom he respected. It does make me wonder if I ever got insanely wealthy. Like if I ever won the lottery, would it completely leave me unchanged? Probably not. I'd probably become a jerk, as one of my friends observed. Get a bigger house. Yeah, I would like to think that some of the money maybe I could use to benefit the world somehow. Found like a school for deaf and blind kids or something. Okay. His whole time was taken up with dinners and balls, spent chiefly at Prince Vasily's house in the company of the stout princess, his wife, and his beautiful daughter Helene. Like the others, Anna Pavlovna's share showed Pierre the change of attitude toward him that had taken place in society. Formerly in Anna Pavlovna's presence, Pierre had always felt that what he was saying was out of place, tactless, and unsuitable. That remarks which seemed to him clever while they formed in his mind became foolish as soon as he uttered them, while on the contrary Hippolyte's stupidest remarks came out clever and apt. Now everything Pierre said was charming. Even Anna Pavlovna did not say so. He could see that she wished to and only refrained out of regard for his modesty. You can kind of see this effect in like The Great Gatsby too, where it's like after he gets rich, like everything changes. People start respecting him now because he's new money. Suckers. To live in a capitalist society. Why was I born into this freaking greed world? I don't know, but here I sit. In the beginning of the winter of 1805-6, Pierre received one of Anna Pavlovna's usual pink notes with an invitation which was added, "You will find the beautiful Helene here, whom it is always delightful to see." When he heard that sentence, Pierre felt for the first time that some link which other people recognized had grown up between himself and Helene, and thought both alarmed him, as if some obligation were being imposed on him, which he could not fulfill, and pleased him as an entertaining supposition. Anna Pavlovna's at home was like the former one, only the novelty she offered her guest this time was not Mortemart, but a diplomatic fresh from Berlin, with the very latest details of the Emperor Alexander's visit to Potsdam, and of how the two august friends had pledged themselves in indissoluble alliance to uphold the cause of justice against the enemy of the human race. Anna Pavlovna received Pierre with a shade of melancholy, evidently relating to the young man's recent loss by the death of Count Bezúkhov. Everyone considered it a duty to assure Pierre that he was greatly afflicted by the death of the father he had hardly known. Her melancholy was just like the august melancholy she showed at the mention of her most august majesty, the Empress Maria Feodorovna. Pierre felt flattered by this. Anna Pavlovna arranged the different groups in her drawing room with her habitual skill. A large group in which were Prince Vasily and the generals had the benefit of the diplomat. Another group was at the tea table. Pierre wished to join the former, but Anna Pavlovna, who was in the excited condition of a commander on a battlefield, to whom thousands of new and brilliant ideas occur, which there is hardly time to put in action, seeing Pierre, touched her sleeve with her finger, saying, "Wait a bit, I have something in view for you this evening." She glanced at Helene and smiled at her. I think the reason why I take this stance is because I don't come from money. If I ever make it famous, it'll be because I got there from the ground up. I'm what they would call lower middle class. Not necessarily poor, but what means I have, I made. And yeah, Yeah, you can kind of see that reflected. Okay, where am I? Wait a bit. I have something in view for this evening. She glanced at Helene and smiled at her. My dear Helene, be charitable to my poor aunt who adores you. Go keep her company for 10 minutes. That it will not be too dull, here is a dear count, who will not refuse to accompany you. The beauty went to the aunt, but Anna Pavlovna detained Pierre, looking as if she had to give some final necessary instructions. Isn't she exquisite? She said to Pierre, pointing to the stately beauty as she glided away. How she carries herself, for so young a girl, such tact, such masterly perfection of manner. It comes from her heart. Happy the man who wins her. With her the least worldly of men would occupy a most brilliant position in society. Don't you think so? I only wanted to know your opinion. And Anna Pavlovna let Pierre go. Pierre, in reply, sincerely agreed with her as to Helene's perfection of manner. If he ever thought of Helene, it was just of her beauty and her remarkable skill in appearing silently dignified in society. The old aunt received the two young people in her corner, but seemed desirous of hiding her adoration for Helene, and inclined rather to show her fear of Anna Pavlovna. She looked at her niece as if inquiring what she was to do with these people. On leaving them, Anna Pavlovna again touched Pierre's sleeve, saying, I hope you won't say that it is dull in my house again. She glanced at Helene. Helene smiled with the look implying that she did not admit the possibility of anyone seeing her without being enchanted. The aunt coughed slowly and said in French that she was very pleased to see Helene. Then she turned to Pierre with the same words of welcome and the same look. In the middle of a dull and halting conversation, Helene turned to Pierre, the beautiful bright smile that she gave to everyone. Pierre was so used to that smile, and with so little meaning for him that he paid no attention to it. I think for as long as I live, money will have some power and control over everything. I don't predict the fall of capitalism during my lifetime, but you never know, maybe it will. Maybe people will wise up. The aunt was just speaking of a collection of snuff boxes that had belonged to Pierre's father, Count Bezikov, showed them her own box. Princess Helene asked to see the portrait of the aunt's husband on the box lid. That's probably the work of Vaness, said Pierre, mentioning a celebrated miniaturist, and leaned over the table to take the snuff box while trying to hear what was being said at the other table. He half rose, meaning to go round, but the aunt handed him the snuff box, passing it across Helene's back. Helene stooped forward to make room, looked round with a smile. She was, as always at evening parties, wearing a dress such as was then fashionable, cut very low at front and back. Her bust, which had always seemed like marble to Pierre, was so close to him that his short-sighted eyes could not but perceive the living charm of her neck and shoulders, so near to his lips that he need only have bent his head a little to have touched them. He was conscious of the warmth of her body, the scent of perfume, and the creaking of her corset as she moved. He did not see her marble beauty forming a complete whole with her dress, but all the charm of her body only covered by her garments. Having once seen this, he could not help being aware of it, just as we cannot renew an illusion we have once seen through. So you have never noticed before how beautiful I am. Long chapters, yo, Helene seemed to say. You had not noticed that I'm a woman. Yes, I am a woman who may belong to anyone. To you too, said her glance. And at that moment Pierre felt that Helene not only could, but must, be his wife, and that it could not be otherwise. He knew this at that moment, as surely as if he had been standing with the altar with her. How and when this would be, he did not know. He did not even know if it would be a good thing. He even felt, he knew not why, that it would be a bad thing. But he knew it would happen. Pierre dropped his eyes. Well, now that you have money, it can. Pierre dropped his eyes, lifted them again, and wished once more to see her as a distant beauty far removed from him, as he had seen her every day, until then. But he could no longer do it. He could not any more than a man who has been looking at a tuft of steppe grass through the mist, and taking it for a tree, can again take it for a tree, after he has once recognized it to be the tuft of grass. She was terribly close to him. She already had a power over him, but Between them there was no longer any barrier except the barrier of his own will. "Well, I will leave you in your little corner," came Anna Pavlovna's voice. "I see you were all right there." Pierre, anxiously trying to remember whether he had done anything reprehensible, looked around with a blush. It seemed to him that everyone knew what had happened to him as he knew it himself. Yeah, a lot of this was happening in the Pride and Prejudice days too. Emily, what was her name? Bronte, I think. Jane Austen. Yeah, sorry, got my authors mixed up. A lot of women who are trying to marry into money. That is the name of the game. Okay, let's see. And not much has changed. It's like the more things change, the more they stay the same. It seemed to him that everyone knew what he knew. That he likes Helene. A little later, when he went out to the large circle, Anna Pavlovna said to him, "I hear you're fitting your Petersburg house." This was true. The architect had told him that it was necessary, and Pierre, without knowing why, was having his enormous Petersburg house done up. Money ain't a thing anymore, so who cares? That's a good thing, but don't move from Prince Vasily's. It's good to have a friend like the prince, she said, smiling at Prince Vasily. I know something about that, don't I? You're still so young. You need advice. Don't be angry with me for exercising an old woman's privilege. She paused as women always do, expecting something after they had mentioned their age. If you marry, it will be a different thing, she continued, uniting them both in one glance. Pierre did not look at Helene nor she at him, but she was just as terribly close to him. He muttered something and colored. When he got home, he could not sleep for a long time from thinking of what had happened. What had happened? Nothing. He merely understood that the woman he had known as a child, of whom when her beauty was mentioned he had said absent-mindedly, "Yes, she's good-looking." He had understood that this woman might belong to him. But she's stupid. I have myself said she's stupid, he thought. There is something nasty, something wrong in the feeling she excites in me. I've been told that her brother Anatole was in love with her, and she with him. Kissing cousins. There was quite a scandal, and that's why she was always away. He was sent away. Hippolyte is her brother. Prince Vasily is her father. It's bad. He reflected, but while he was thinking this, the reflection was still incomplete. He caught himself smiling and was conscious that another line of thought had sprung up. While thinking of her worthlessness, he was also dreaming of how she would be his wife, how she would love him become quite different, how all he had thought and heard of her might be false. He again saw her not as the daughter of Prince Vasily, but visualized her whole body, only veiled by its gray dress. But no, why did this thought never occur to me before? Then again he told himself that it was impossible, that there would be something unnatural, and as it seemed to him dishonorable in this marriage. He recalled her former words and looks, and the words and looks of those who had seen them together. He's like, you know what? She wasn't fond of me back then, so maybe she's not a true friend. Maybe she just wants the money. Maybe. He recalled Anna Pavlovna's words and looks when she spoke to him about his house, recalled thousands of such hints from Prince Vasily and others, and was seized by terror lest he had already in some way bound himself to do something that was evidently wrong and that he ought not to do. At the very time he was expressing this conviction to himself, another part of his mind, her image rose in all its womanly beauty. Yep. One of the first questions they almost always ask is, so what do you do? How much do you make? How much do you have? And yeah, the dad's also in that camp. He's like, if I can have my daughter marry someone rich, we'll be better off. I think Fyodor Dostoevsky has like a more non-rich person take on this. It's like, yeah, you can marry him, but if he's a jerk, his money might not be enough. Okay, but anyway, chapter 2 next time. And the Russian author series, these chapters are quite long. But as always, thank you for watching. From the Stormer Show, have a nice night.